Good afternoon and welcome from the Association of MBAs to our monthly seminar, Understanding Women's Careers. I'm delighted to welcome today three outstanding women in their own right, but also as researchers informing the work of women and their careers. Viki Holton is a principal researcher at Ashridge Business School. She has undertaken work with employee attitude surveys, evaluation and benchmarking of human resource initiatives, such as diversity and development. The author of many books and articles on gender diversity in organizations, and is a member of a number of leading journals. Presenting after Viki is Fiona Dent, Director of Executive Education, also at Ashridge Business School. She's a member of the Ashridge Management Committee and responsible for one of the two education faculty groups which manage programs, client relationships, and deliver management development solutions across Ashridge. Fiona teaches and consults in a broad spectrum of leadership, personal, interpersonal, and relationship skills, and is trained in a range of psychometrics. Viki will be followed by Fiona as our first presenters, and followed on by Ines Wichert, a psychologist with a special interest in talent management and leadership development. Ines has been working as a management consultant advising global organizations on their talent issues for many years and has a PhD in organizational psychology from the University of Cambridge. Ines is also the author of Where Have All the Senior Women Gone? Critical Job Assignments for Women Leaders. Since writing the book, Ines has joined the Connexa High Performance Institute, where she leads the Women in Leadership Research and Product Development stream. At the Association of MBAs, diversity is critical to us. That includes all kinds of diversity, but of specific interest in the UK at the moment is diversity of women and, of course, women on boards. Ladies, I welcome you to today's webinar, and if I may start with Viki, followed on by Fiona and then Ines, and if you wouldn't mind, if we get some interesting questions coming through, if I may interrupt you and ask questions directly from our wider community. So thank you. Viki, if you would like to start.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to have the opportunity to tell you something about research that we've done at Ashridge in understanding women's careers. We thought what we'd do in the presentation is tell you something about what we did and how we designed it, and also end up with some findings. Now, you should be able to see on your slide now, we've got a couple of very nice images there. Well, we think they're very nice. The one on the left, the purple one, is an executive summary of our research, and that's available, that's published in December. At the end of last year. So if anybody wants a copy of that, we can organise for that to happen. The other paler image on the right-hand side is the front cover of our book, and that's due to be out in the next few weeks. And you could find details of that on Amazon or from an independent bookshop if you would prefer to. Okay, so let's have a look at why we did the research. These are some headline findings from articles that have been in the press here in the UK in the last few months. And it's definitely an interesting time because all the discussion about gender quotas for women directors is really making the headlines, which is very nice for us and our research. But the points that perhaps I think are relevant to why we started to do this are the two comments on the left-hand side. The pink one at the top there saying that it's still lonely for women, and that's something that we hear among women managers who come on programs here at Ashridge Business School. And the other one, the green one, about women making slow progress to shatter the glass ceiling. Well, I don't know how far back your memories go, but I can think of 5 or 10 years ago when people were still saying the same or very similar comments to that. So that's basically why we started. We wanted to find out what was happening and whether things had changed. So what we wanted to get you to do here, we wanted to collect your views. I'm not sure, is this where Leanne can take us through the poll that we've got, or do I need to say some more about it? Sorry, the process is happening there. I can see the poll's opening. We've got 3 questions here. that we wanted to ask you to answer. I'll talk about them in just a moment when you can see them on your screen as well. And they're asking about your experience in your organisations. So I'm conscious that that may not be relevant for some of you. If, for instance, you're working as an independent consultant, or say if you're between jobs at the moment, but hopefully we'll have some people who can answer this, and then we'll compare that later on with findings from our research. So I think that's happening, and everybody can see that on their screen. So I'll carry on and tell you something while you're finishing with that, or thinking about those 3 questions. How we did our research. We had 2 ways of collecting the data. We had a survey questionnaire, and we had 1,400 women, just over 1,400 women who responded to that. And then we also did in-depth interviews with women leaders, and you can see some of the companies there. We also tried to collect different nationalities, Chinese, Singapore, Indian, American experience, and we also interviewed people who were in the voluntary sector and some entrepreneurs as well. And then the 2 other points there are the details of the reports that I mentioned to you earlier and showed you. So this is some data from the people who completed the survey. We thought it'd be interesting if you could see who they were, the type of background that they have. If we look on the left-hand circle first, the yellow circle, the yellow part of the circle, sorry, down at the bottom, just under half are aged 41 to 50. So it's not just people who are at the start of their career, it's people with quite a lot of experience. And we'll come back to that in just a moment, and we'll see some other things about that. And then on the right-hand side, we've got nationality. So mostly UK, 73% from the UK, 18% from the rest of Europe, and then a smaller number are international. And then we've got 3 more pieces of data here that you can see. If we go left to right, the management level, 30% are either director or chief executive level. So going back to that point earlier about age, then that corresponds quite well with that. If we look at the centre circle, we've got mostly people who are in that blue range, which is companies with 1,000 or more staff. And then if we look on the right-hand side, then we've got salary details there. And you can see on the right-hand part, we've got the majority are earning between £41,000 and £80,000. So that's a little bit about their background. So let's move on and talk about some survey findings. We asked, one of the questions we were interested in was about the people that had helped women in their career, who had offered them support and advice. And we didn't actually define what we meant by that. We didn't differentiate between whether it was formally given or whether it was provided by the organisation, but just the 6 different groups that you can see there that had helped them. So if I divide it into 2 halves, maybe, I think that's the easiest way to share the information. If we look on the top line, 87% said that their boss had helped them, 77% said their colleagues had helped them, and 69%, so just over 2/3, said that family had helped them. And then if we look in the bottom part of the slide, the pictures there, just over half said that friends had helped them, and then for mentors and coaches, then it's just under half in each case. So I think the points that come through from that kind of data is first of all, it's quite a wide variety of support mechanisms that women are using, which we would say was very good and very useful. There's obviously the key part that the boss is playing. So 87%, so nearly 9 out of 10 say that the boss has been supportive. And I'm not sure you would have found that maybe 5 or 10 years ago. There were definitely more conservative attitudes, shall we say, to women working perhaps. So maybe that is something that's changed quite a lot. And a point that I think comes through very much from the interviews that we did was about the power of coaching and how some of the women that we interviewed use it in a very structured way. Thinking about somebody who has 3 coaches. So she has one person from a company she worked in many years ago. She has an ex-boss from her current company who's now moved on but is still her coach. And she also has somebody within her own environment. And I don't think, actually, that's too dissimilar from what we heard from the other women that we interviewed. They're all very keen on using coaching to understand their leadership style and to get more details about how they can improve their performance and the performance of their teams. So that's the start of our research findings, and I'll hand over to Fiona now, and she can tell you more.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Fiona Dent, and I'm going to continue by just sharing some more of our findings. In the questionnaire and in our discussions with women, we talked a lot about what did they feel promoted their success in their career so far. And it was very interesting to hear people's stories, obviously, but also to try to categorize what it was that helped people to get on. And there was a resounding thought that it was about your work attitude. And that women who had a sort of determination and had self-confidence and passion for what they did and had a great ambition tended to sort of have more career success. And that tended to mean that these women had a lot of self-belief and they were able to think through and plan their careers. Many of the women who we talked to talked about having thought through where they wanted to get to in their career and to set themselves goals at various different stages. One of the stories that we heard was from one of our interviewees who currently works at Google, and this interviewee talked about how she set herself a rather ambitious goal. I suspect many people might think, but she wanted to be a main board director by the time she was 30, and she did it. It wasn't with Google, I hasten to add, but she did become a main board director with the organisation she worked with prior to joining Google. And of course this probably helped her to get into her current role, which is a UK marketing director in the Google organisation. And she had quite a lot of interesting stories to tell us about the attitudes that she experienced among some of the other people that she worked with, both men and women, in terms of her own kind of drive and ambition and how that played out in the long run. Viki's already talked about the people supporting. That tended to be one of the most commonly mentioned promoters as well, that having supportive colleagues, families, friends, bosses was vitally important, and also learning how to use them. On the other side of the coin, we also asked people what it was that hindered their career success so far, and surprise, surprise, we tended to find that it was the opposite of the things, in many cases, it was the opposite of the things that promoted. And we had lots and lots of stories and lots of examples from people of some of the things that they believed that they had done perhaps earlier in their career, and some of the women still were doing these things to themselves almost in terms of hindering their career. The lack of confidence one came through again quite strongly in lots of different ways. So you can see on the chart there that this idea of imposter syndrome. We had a lot of stories about imposter syndrome where women tend to ask themselves, when am I going to be found out? When is someone going to find out that I don't have the qualifications for doing this job? So I mean, that all links to the kind of whole issue of self-doubt and self-belief, and back to the attitude issue again. Other stories we had were that women had a tendency not to ask for promotion or ask for development or ask for pay rises in quite the same way as they could potentially see some of their male colleagues doing. One of the stories we heard from one of the women was a sort of example of a boss who wasn't particularly supportive, and if she'd actually listened to this boss, may have had a devastating effect on her career. She found that this particular boss was quite critical and tended to undermine any decisions she made, which led to self-doubt in her. And the final kind of crunch came when he told her that there was no way she was going to be promoted because she was probably going to have children and go off on maternity leave. And she nearly believed him. She said that when she told us the story, she told us that she nearly believed him. She nearly let that get in the way of what has turned into being quite a successful career at a senior level in a major organisation. But undoubtedly, the family issues are a hindrance for many women, and that comes through in all sorts of guises: lack of support outside work, responsibility that the woman feels for any children or other family issues that they're dealing with, but also lack of creativity in organisations in terms of supporting women when they are raising a family. So the little picture on there, the wordle on there, indicates some of the key hindrances that we found. We then asked women some questions about their leadership style, and found that the key message was pretty strongly that women tended to be fairly intuitive with their style, that many of the stories we heard in our interviews indicated that they tended to vary their style to suit the situation. The strongest preference that women had were for the more transformational styles of, as you can see on the chart here, of participative and situational leadership approach. But we did hear lots of stories of women saying it's really important to be able to vary your style and to know when to change from being collaborative and participative to making the decision and to taking responsibility. And one of our respondents talked about, or quite a number of people actually, talked about being seen as soft and fluffy, and that sometimes once you get to the senior levels, women can be seen as soft and fluffy because they use participative, more collaborative styles of leadership. So it's really important that women get the balance right, but don't lose their authenticity and individualism by trying to mirror men, but rather that they show people that not only can they be collaborative, but they can actually take tough decisions and maybe take responsibility for what they're doing. In addition to leadership style, and this is where the poll begins to come into play, we also asked our respondents about some of their views in relation to the situation in their organisation. And some of these findings were some of the most challenging findings I think we found in our survey. Both Viki and I have been working in the management development field for 20+ years, and for all of those years I've heard stories from some of my women participants on the courses talking about how challenging it is for women to break through into senior management positions, and how challenging it is when they do get into management positions to be taken seriously, etc. And I guess I'd hoped that this survey would prove that things had changed dramatically. Sadly, that wasn't to be the case. And the survey kind of indicated, in response to the 3 questions I think we've asked you, is the first question was, do you agree men and women are judged differently in your organisation with regard to leadership style and behaviour? And nearly 49% of people agreed with this statement, that people were judged differently. The next question, nearly 48% of people agreed that agreed that it was harder for women to succeed compared with some of their male colleagues. And 56% agreed that men and women were judged equally with regard to promotion. So that was quite a nice one to hear. I wonder what the survey that you guys have taken part in indicates, because it would be interesting to see what your response was to the survey, which was exactly the same questions. So Leanne or Sharon, can we have a look at the survey results?
Hi Fiona, we're right here with survey results. So on our survey, 32% strongly agreed men and women are judged differently in the organisation. 32% strongly agreed, 36% agreed, 8% neither agreed nor disagreed, 20% disagreed, and only 4% strongly disagreed.
So that more than mirrors our results from the...
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. What about the other ones?
And the next question, let me just go on to the next poll. Leanne will just be launching that in a second.
Okay.
So if our audience here could answer, we have the open poll. Is it harder for women to succeed in your organisation compared to male colleagues? Results are coming in now. We have around 35%, over 40% voting. Great, the votes are coming in pretty quickly now. We'll give a few seconds. 70% voted now. For those of you that can't make your mind up, I'm going to give you just a few more seconds, and then we'll close.
Okay.
Okay, let's close the vote here. So, is it harder for women to succeed in your organisation compared to the male colleagues? 20% strongly agreed, 24% agreed, 20% neither agreed nor disagreed, 20% disagreed, and 16% strongly disagreed.
So similar. Similar again, I think. Yeah.
Interesting. So we'll go back into the presentation, and then we'll open the poll again for another couple of questions at the end of your presentation, Fiona, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think we are pretty well towards the end of our presentation now. There are a couple more slides which we have in the pack, which we will make available to the audience afterwards. But they basically look at some of the findings and offer some advice for organisations and individuals. And perhaps that's the sort of thing that may come up in questions. So maybe we should think about handing over to Ines now to give her an opportunity to talk.
Okay, well, Ines, we're going to hand over to you. To our audience throughout the world that are listening in today, if you would like to send in any questions, we'll be happy to field those towards the end of the presentation. And also, we will be doing the next part of our poll and reporting back to you. So, Ines, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Well, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for that, Viki and Fiona. And I think it really sets up very nicely what I'd like to spend the remainder of the webinar talking about. We've heard very clearly that there are some barriers to women progressing in organizations. But really what I'd like to do is maybe pick out one specific thing that women can do to help themselves to make that transition into senior leadership positions a little bit more easily. So I've termed my presentation Becoming a Leader, and particularly becoming a leader as a woman. And what I'd like to talk about is some research that, again, similar to Viki and Fiona, has just appeared in a book. The book is called Where Have All the Senior Women Gone? And really quite important, just a subtitle, 9 Critical Job Assignments for Women Leaders. And really what the book focuses on is to really see, well, what are some of the very practical steps that women who've made it all the way to the top have taken to help them get there. We do know undoubtedly that women face a lot more barriers than men in organizations, cultural, structural. Some of those have already been alluded to, but clearly some women do make it to the top. So I conducted a lot of interviews, over 50 in-depth interviews with both senior women and men from across the world, mostly from sort of FTSE 100 and international equivalents in terms of organizational size. And I've asked them about the game changers. So I've asked them to talk to me about the kinds of job assignments that sort of very practical on-the-job learning that really has allowed them to, first of all, develop as leaders, as female or women leaders, but secondly, and also very importantly, to give those people around them, the senior decision makers, often the male senior decision makers, the comfort that they're really up to the job, that they can really step up to the plate and take on those very serious and senior roles. Now, in addition to some of the interview data, there's also up-to-date academic research, the last 25 years of that work, just to really sort of like solidify some of those findings. So in terms of what's motivated the book, is similar to Viki and Fiona. I've often observed that women just go about sort of like planning careers slightly differently. So that really is something for me that I wanted to have a look at. So let's take a look at what the senior women told me. So here they are, 9 critical job assignments. And this is a simplified extract from the book. So there's a lot of fantastic information in the book. If this is of interest to you, the book might be a great opportunity to read up on some of these assignments. Now you can see there are 9 of them in total, and I've grouped them into 4 boxes. Before I talk you through what's in these different stages, I just wanted to make sure that that you understand it's not every woman did go through all of these 9 critical job assignments. I think that's quite important to understand. The majority of them went through quite a lot of them. And secondly, also, not every woman followed exactly this path. But if you sort of zoom up and look at the data from sort of like a macro level, the kind of sort of progression that you've got here on that slide has emerged. So let me talk you through some of those in a little bit more detail. So you can see here it's about an early stretch assignment, and a lot of you on the call probably have come across those. You know, sort of like having an MBA background, you will all be going through professional careers and probably can identify with that. So that's an assignment. You come fresh out of university, you come fresh out of your training, and really you take on an assignment that nothing so far has prepared you for. It's almost biting off more than you can chew, but through sheer willpower and early leadership potential, it's something you turn around to great acclaim. And what these early stretch assignments do is they bring you up on that high potential radar for senior managers very early on. And this sponsorship, and I think we heard about that early on, the importance of support from bosses, senior mentors, senior sponsors is incredibly important throughout a career. Next up is what I've called broader and grittier roles, and I think this is something where when we sometimes have a look at career histories, women maybe do a little bit less of this, and there are good reasons for it. But these broad and grittier roles are things such as international assignments, really showing that whatever you've delivered so far, you can deliver equally well in a foreign country. It's that frontline operation experience, people management experience is a really important one, and also working in a different environment. And what these do is they almost sort of like help you build a very strong foundation, also a very broad foundation. And that breadth is something that's quite important, particularly if we're thinking about aspirations to making to senior management roles. And maybe just before I go on to talk about some of the other ones, clearly all of these are important for, you know, a fulfilling and satisfying career. So it's not just important if you have your eye on the top job. Any of these are worthwhile considering in terms of broadening out with regards to your career. Now, the 3 assignments I want to focus on in a little bit more detail are what I've called the leadership brand. So it's about developing a leadership brand. It's that time in a woman's career where she's built a broad foundation. She's shown that technically she is fabulous at her job, but it's now really pulling away from that technical expertise and really starting to show those people around her that she is a true leader, not just a technical leader, technical expert. So for me, this is about pulling away from the rest of the organization, from the rest of the peers. And women seem to do that particularly well with regards to 3 particular roles. The first one is the turnaround pro. So think about roles or projects that are failing, teams that are not performing, and really coming in as a firefighter and sorting out a particularly urgent problem. The second one is the change agent, and the last one is the corporate entrepreneur. And I'll talk through all 3 of those in a little bit more detail. Now, the last one here, maybe just to note, there is obviously the last step is joining the executive committee, so really joining the top team. And maybe just a thing to note there is, obviously, the challenges don't stop, the learning doesn't stop, it's an ongoing journey. Okay, so let's look at developing a leadership brand and really sort of being recognized and developing as a leader. So the first one, the corporate entrepreneur. And this is a really fascinating assignment. A lot of the women talked about it. There's sort of like the innovation, the vision. And if you're a corporate entrepreneur, it's about creating something that you just haven't done before and that hasn't existed before in the organization. And we all know that innovation and renewal are really important to organizational survival. For some organizations, they're more important than others, but really innovation is core to any organization's survival. And also really important to point out here is it's more than just blue sky thinking. So having a great idea is not enough here. It's really about a successful implementation of that idea. And that could be anything. It could be setting up a business within a business. It's about launching a new product. It could be a new service line. It's anything that the organization hasn't seen before. And one of the really interesting things that women enjoyed, but also that really helped them to build their career, was around creating a legacy and making something stick. So that's something that's quite important from this assignment and something I'll come back to in a minute. And maybe just this last point to point out what's different to being an entrepreneur. Obviously, there is no personal capital at stake because you do all of that innovation within an organizational context. But of course, there's a sort of certain risk to personal reputation. And that needs to be kept in mind. Okay, so this is a whole chapter on one slide, so there's a lot of it there. But I'll just pick out some of the highlights. Each of the chapters for the 9 critical job assignments looks, first of all, at the challenges that presented themselves to the women, and therefore what really made these assignments so gritty and so important and so useful for on-the-job learning. It talked about their personal learning and their personal development as leaders, but also very importantly how those assignments helped them build their brand within the organization, and then the kind of support they drew on. So if we look at the entrepreneur, what we can see here, the challenge is actually really broad, and I think that's what brings some of the great learning. It's starting off with devising the strategy and the business plan. Next up is really building personal credibility. A lot of the time the women I talked to said, look, this is something I've never done this before. No one's ever done this before. So I didn't have any credibility for doing this type of work within the organization. So I had to build my personal credibility, and I also really had to build a really strong support base. Because it's not easy to get organizations to buy into new ideas, to get the capital, to get the teams, the sort of resources behind that. Now, interesting, a lot of the women talked about the bureaucracy and the resistance. And there's some interesting research to say that actually large organizations are phenomenally good at resisting new ideas. It's sometimes been called the immune response of large organizations to innovation. So really overcoming those organization immune responses to something that's new, that's novel, that's innovative. And of course, the last point here is quite important, building the right team. If you think about building a new project or bringing a new product into, let's say, a food manufacturing company, it's a big piece of work, it's a big project, so you need to get the right team, and corporations normally are not full of entrepreneurs, so you need to find the right people who have a very diverse skills mix. You need to convince them it's the right thing for their careers to really join you in this sort of endeavor. So building that right team is something that's quite important as well. So thinking about some of the learning, it's around stakeholder management and influencing other people, and then also in terms of career benefits, it's thinking around the capability and that creating a legacy. That's quite powerful. So thinking about having something you can really point back to. Okay. Next one, the change agent. Now we all know that change is a fact of organizational life, and therefore it's very important here. And organization change has often been deemed to be a differentiator between managers and between leaders. So managers keep the status quo, and leaders instigate change and make organizations fit for the future. So obviously, if you can become a change agent and be seen as such, that's very powerful. Right. Now, we've probably all personally have gone through change. That might have been in organizations or through personal change, and you probably all remember that there's a real human element to it. It's that dealing with emotions that change brings. It's a lack of information. It's sort of like an uncertainty, and that's really the sort of learning that women took away from that particular assignment. It's thinking around how do you help other people overcome emotions, resistance, and how do you really get them to come along this journey or come on this journey with you as a change agent. Now, as I said early on, if you can be seen as a change agent, that's a very powerful tick in the box in terms of becoming a leader, clearly something that every organization needs. And also really a lot of the women talked about being able to see the organization more holistically, because actually when you start instigating organization-wide change, there's lots of little elements and lots of different parts of the organization that are involved. So becoming more of a person who thinks holistically, who thinks organization-wide, and who is no longer a functional expert but a business leader, something that's really important here. Right, okay, and maybe just in terms of support, obviously organization politics is a sort of like a very important element of organization change. So having some role models for learning how to deal with that is something that's very important for the women. Right, the last one here is the turnaround pro, and for me this really is almost sort of a natural follow-on. It's sort of the next step up from organizational change. So it's change again, but it's sort of like supercharged change, because it's this time you're dealing with very urgent crisis situations. So it's situations where the market share is plummeting, where there's large sums of money lost, customers are leaving in droves. So it's really a situation where someone needs to be parachuted in and needs to stabilize the situation very quickly. And it's interesting thinking about some of the sort of the research and looking at some of it. Actually, a lot of women who are appointed to senior roles often come into roles where there's a lot of organization change and where there have been some problems in organization. Now, a practical or a very positive explanation of that would be women are very practical problem solvers, therefore they're the right people for the role. Maybe a less sort of positive explanation for that would be something that's been called the glass cliff. So that would be to say, well, if organizations have a lot of problems and they're just not managing to stabilize situations, then the sort of typical male contendants might say, well, thank you, but no thank you, I'd rather not take that role. Or organizations might say, look, we've tried everything else, let's just give a woman a go. And sometimes people like for Carol Bartz, recently the sort of fired CEO at Yahoo, and of course also Carly Fiona has also been sort of mentioned as an example of that. Okay, so in terms of the turnaround pro, clearly something that requires immediate action, fixing problems. And one of the things that women talked about, the interviewees talked about, was a lot about reestablishing commitment. So it's a situation where people have lost interest in the situation and where senior decision makers actually are no longer really interested in a particular project. So really spending a lot of time on reestablishing commitment, but also really working on getting other people in the organization to sort of trust again and to sort of change a broken environment and back into something that's much more productive. Crisis management, a really important personal learning that women took away. But in terms of the career benefits, really, I guess the one that really stands out is about delivering results. If you can show that you have turned around a failing team, a failing project, that clearly is very, very easy to demonstrate the kinds of benefits to senior decision makers around you. So in terms of I guess just bringing it all together, and there's a lot of information here, I appreciate that, so the book has a lot more detail underpinning all of that. What all of these critical job assignments, but particularly the three that I've talked to in a bit more detail, what they do is they do three things. They increase the visibility of women in the organization, and we know that senior decision makers don't always see talented women enough or have them enough on their radar. It increases that familiarity, because for someone to really have the confidence that they will promote you or put you forward as a potential candidate for a senior role, they need to know who you are as a person, how you operate, the kinds of results you deliver, how stress resilient you are. So all of that is really important. And finally, it's about personal comfort. So if I, as a senior decision maker, put myself forward and say, look, there's a great candidate here and I think she is right right for the role, I personally need to have some comfort that this is the right person. So all of that increases general perceptions of how promotable a woman is, and that is something that women need to really work on that perception of being promotable. Right, and I think we're almost at the end of the time. We want to leave a little bit of time for some questions. So really, oops, too far, as in terms of almost in the form of a summary, just maybe some things that you want to think through with regards to your own careers. Now, we've talked about developing a leadership brand, but not all of the women went through all of the sort of the broad assignments first of all. So there might be something that, you know, for you right now, it might be the right thing to go abroad, to do an international assignment, or to get more operational frontline experience. So thinking about whether you've got that breadth and that broad base in place. Also really understanding what is it that's going to follow you around, and I think that's one of the quotes that's personally really stuck with me from the research and from the interviews, is you need to have something that's going to follow you around, and really understanding what is it that's going to follow you around in the organization. What's the one thing you will be known for? And then, of course, we've heard Fiona and Viki talk about it. It's really important to understand the people around you. Those people have an influence on your career. Do they know what you want to achieve? Do you have the right support base and the right sponsors in place? And then really, just as we saw on the last slide, thinking around your own visibility, thinking about how comfortable senior decision makers feel about you as a potential leader, and taking steps to increase that. So that really brings my presentation to an end, and I think I'll hand over at this stage for some general question answers.
Thank you very much, Ines. Thank you. And thank you to all our presenters today. May I encourage all of you out there in our community to email in, to write in your questions. But as you're doing that, also to multitask, as we women tend to do rather well. And we're going to put our next poll out, our final poll. And the question is, men and women are judged equally with regard to promotion in your organization. Our poll is open, and we are looking for your votes right now. Those of you that have voted in the last few seconds, if you'd also like to start to think of any questions, and if there is a particular presenter, if you could also put that in your question. So just as we're waiting for the results to come in, 96% of you are women as part of this seminar here today. We have many countries represented, so welcome and thank you for joining us from Australia, Bermuda, Brunei, Canada, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Ghana, Ireland, India, Italy, Jamaica, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Nigeria, Trinidad and Tobago, and Zambia. So although the dominant sector here is women, we certainly have our diversity in the international participation. So thank you all for joining us. So our poll now is closed with 80% of you having voted. So the question, men and women are judged equally with regard to promotion in your organization. Strongly agree? Sadly, 4%. Agree? 37%. Neither agree nor disagree, 15%. Disagree, 37%, and strongly disagree, 7%. An interesting result. Would anybody like to comment on that from our panel?
That's interesting that we had with the survey that we did, we had 56% of the people that responded to our survey thought that women and men were judged equally. So it looks as if it's relatively similar to, sorry?
That's an interesting observation. Yes, thank you. If I, in the interest of time, if I can move on to our next question, and also for all of you out there to fire in your questions to us. Our question here is on finding a woman to be a business mentor. So how do you select a good mentor or coach? Viki, perhaps you'd like to take that question first?
Well, assuming that the person who's asked is already in an organisation, I think the best thing to do is look around to see somebody that you like and respect, and go and ask them. It may be better if you find somebody who isn't directly in your part of the business, because that can sometimes lead to a conflict of interest. But that's the way that I would do it. Fiona, would you like to add any comments?
Fiona, Nish?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a coach, and one of the things that's always struck me, and I also have a coach. One of the things that's always struck me for either a mentoring or a coaching role is it's about the quality of the relationship. And so for me, it's about identifying somebody that you feel you can be open and honest, and that you believe will give you value for the time that you invest in the relationship. So I think it's the research that you actually do in identifying the correct person is the most important part of this. I don't think there's any one place you can go to and sort of identify a coach, because different people require and demand different types of relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just to build on that, I think these are all really important points. I would probably also say, thinking about mentors in particular, you know, and coaches obviously have a very important role to play as well around some of the skills development. I think thinking about mentors, I think there's a number of different places. I would absolutely agree that looking around in the organization is really important. I mean, bear in mind, it may not be a woman. I think, you know, a sort of like a male mentor is just as useful, and sometimes actually they are sort of closer to the center of power. So if that is something that is possible, I think that should not be disregarded. I think often maybe former project leads or sort of like former bosses or people who have seen you work but then have moved on. I think that is a good way of finding people. And for women, we do know it's a little bit more difficult to find mentors just because of that male-female sort of power relationship, and a lot of the time we don't have enough female mentors. So I think really often it's up to women to almost, you know, do the research, as Fiona and Viki said, but then really be brave and ask someone, because I often think that senior men and women feel quite flattered if you ask them to be their mentor, and they will genuinely try to accommodate you if they can at all. So I think really just taking the initiative, as with so many of the things that's important to career development, and looking for someone. And if you really feel that you can't find someone within your organization, there are a lot of fantastic women's networking organizations that actually offer mentoring schemes. So maybe then look outside the organization to find some. But I would encourage everyone to look for a mentor, because we do just know that they're really important to women's careers.
Thank you, Ines. Interestingly, the next question, I think we'll start with you on this one. With regards to making myself more visible to the decision makers, are there any tips, approaches you can suggest when I have a very traditional male boss in between me and the decision maker? My boss tries to keep me in my box. It's like he sees me as a threat. Any advice?
No, I think that's a really interesting one. And I think it's really about the visibility. You get visibility very, very easily by getting on the right projects and on getting sort of like being in the right part of the organization. So I think this is a fine line to tread, but you know, don't let your boss keep you in that box. I think it's stepping outside. And a lot of the women I've been working with over the years, and you know, from personal experience as well, I think you need to make a decision on how much you will allow a boss to sort of keep you back. You might have to sidestep the boss and find informal channels to share with the person at the next level up some of your successes, some of the things that you've done. So finding ways of filtering information sort of like past the boss to the next level up. I think that's really quite important. And I talked to a lot of women who said, look, you know, my boss really limited my career, and we heard that early on in some of the examples that Viki and Fiona talked about. It then really becomes a time to say, well, is this the right boss for me, or do I need to think about moving somewhere else in the organization?
Great. Fiona or Viki, any comments there?
Well, well, I was going to say you can take the approach direct, and you could ask your boss, and you might find that you're mistaken, that that's not the intention at all. Or you could take the approach indirect and find an ally, as Ines was saying, somebody else who you can talk to, who can then help you manage the relationship to others beyond your boss.
Okay.
I was simply going to say that in my career I had a boss like that, and I think I had to make in the end the hard decision that, that not only was the boss traditional, but actually the organisation was very traditional, and I had to take a risk and move out, and I think that's sometimes one of the most difficult decisions to make if it's a job that you enjoy, but sometimes it's necessary to do that.
Thank you, Fiona. The next question, perhaps Viki, if you'd like to start with this one. Can you recommend the best first steps for moving career up and into senior management? Perhaps the top 3 steps?
The best, sorry, can you say it again, Sharon?
Yes. Can you recommend the best first steps for moving a career up and into senior management? Maybe the top 3 steps.
I suppose you've got to have an achievement. You've got to have something that you can call your own. So maybe you've been a member of a team, or maybe you've led a team, but you've got to actually be able to produce something that will impress your other colleagues. I would think that's one of the key things. I think you also need to be involved in projects that are important to your organisation. It's not very much point in doing something that doesn't really count for much in the company. So you probably need to take a good look and try and assess where you want to be, and to see if you can be involved in things in those areas. And I think also it comes back to this point that you do need a sponsor, and you do need somebody to help you gain your visibility in the organisation. They would be the 3 things that I would say.
Thank you. Ines, do you have any comments on that?
You know, I would agree with all of that. I think it's about really making sure that you are in a role that's central to the success of the organization, because that gives you visibility. Being in peripheral roles, which women tend to do, in support roles or support functions, senior decision makers look there far less frequently. So maneuvering yourself into a central part of the organization or onto a high visibility project is really important. I would reiterate the sponsorship. And I think really just not having any self-limiting beliefs, really believing that you can do it, and really saying, I can do this, I have had success to date, and I will have success in future, and whatever I set my eyes on, I can achieve. Those for me would be the top 3.
Thank you. A question now, is it possible for a woman to enter the boys' club? And if so, how? Fiona, would you like to take that one head on?
Oh my goodness.
I know, quite a question.
Yeah. An interesting.
Assuming, I mean, we're all assuming that there are boys' clubs.
I think possibly a question in response. What is the boys' club? I think it means different things to different people. Some people think the old boys' network is that you've all been to the same school, university, and followed the same kind of career path, and that's probably fairly traditional city business tradition, and I guess that does exist. I think there are examples of women who are breaking into the boys' club. There are women who challenge it, and I do think it is doable. If I can answer it in the opposite way and say the worst mistake you can make, I think, is trying to become a kind of pseudo-man, if you like, and taking on some of the male tendencies. I think the successful women who manage to break into the boys, to break into the senior level networks, stay true to themselves. And I think Ines said this, and I know we said it. It's about having self-belief, and it's about knowing what you can achieve, and being willing to take some risks and to challenge where necessary. So I think it is possible, but it depends. There's a bit of it depending on what you actually mean about the old boys' club.
Fantastic, thank you. Viki, a quick comment?
Well, just one thought on a different perspective to this. Thinking back a few years ago, there was one organisation where the women felt that all these sporting events that were organised around the clients and everything rather excluded them. They were invited to go, but they didn't particularly want to go to the rugby and the golf and various other things. So with a bit of help from somebody at senior level, they created their own client days. and they did what they wanted to do, and they found that they were just as successful, but it meant that they actually enjoyed them more. So there are different approaches.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ines, a quick comment.
Yes, you know, I think the old boys club is actually, it can be quite in a bizarre sort of way, can be quite powerful for women, because it is around senior decision makers. So if as a woman you can get a sponsor or a mentor in that group, I think that's really powerful. And the first step into this old boys network or old boys club for me is around networking. And a lot of the women I talked to, we talked a lot about networking in the interviews, and it's phenomenal to listen to very senior and very successful women talk about, even at their level, how still sometimes they feel excluded from some of the conversations, because men and women just tend to sort of socialize and interact on different topics. Women very quickly go to very personal topics about families, personal experiences, and men just tend to talk more about, you know, with the sort of the more objective topics where you don't have to share too many sort of insights straight away about you as a person. It's more about the sport and the business. And a lot of women said, look, you know, I don't really quite like going to these networking events, but I have to, because it's part of me progressing. So a lot of women talk through their own personal journeys of how they just learned to feel much more comfortable at these large networking events, how they just went prepared. They just knew that they would be able to talk to some senior men about some recent business deals, about some sort of, you know, things in the news, not too political, but they went equipped. So they sort of like spent a little bit of time thinking about what it is they would talk about. And they also had a bit of a plan to, you know, if they met someone sort of in the lift or had the sort of, you know, the 2 or 3 minutes conversation on the corridor, they could talk about something and they could find a topic of common interest. And I think sometimes women maybe have to take the first step. If there's a group of men standing together and talking about things that they might find a bit intimidating or they find not quite to their liking, it's about, again, taking the initiative, stepping up and changing the topic. And most of the women, and from my own experience, men are responsive to that, and they will change the topic and they will include you. So for me, it's about saying it is a barrier, but you've just got to be a bit prepared, and you need to be ready to step into that, and you will get some good results.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And if I can close on perhaps highlighting the fact that there are some wonderful women role models out there who are not necessarily examples of the old boys club, but a favourite of mine is the head of HSBC in India, on the main board of HSBC Asia. A very feminine, very elegant, very intelligent woman, Naina Lal Kidwai, who is the epitome of what I would regard a top woman in the boardroom and a great inspiration. Ladies, that has been most informative, inspirational, and certainly motivational, so thank you all. For all of you out there throughout the world, may I refer you to Viki and Fiona's book, Women in Business, and also to Ines's book, Where Have All the Senior Women Gone?, if you want to find out more and actually engage a little bit more in the topic from a research point of view, have those facts and figures at your fingertips. Our next webinar will be Jean-Pierre Lacroix from Shikatani Lacroix Brand Design. He is going to bring to us the latest thinking on branding and marketing. Our key takeaways from the webinar will be trends shaping brand and marketing strategies, methods of engagement and the factors affecting them, and the factors that impact on this method of engagement. We'll get back to you with dates and confirmation. We'll be emailing out the slides to all of you. But if I could just finish on a thanks from one of our members of the webinar. Mine is a reflection on all the speakers. You have really inspired me. From now, I will devote my self-confidence and belief that I will succeed and achieve whatever I set my eyes on. My goal is to become the chairman, main director of a multinational organization by 2022. Ladies, if nothing else, you have put the pebble in the pond, and what a great impact that has been. So thank you for the feedback and the comments. Ladies, thank you indeed for your contributions today on behalf of our community here, but really on behalf of women globally, for the important work that you are doing in establishing our rightful place at the top table. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to our next webinar with our guest speaker, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, in May. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.